Snow Ranger Anthony Jeremy vanished on a routine 2014 snowpack check. No tracks, no gear, nothing. Search teams combed Big Bear Mountain for days, but the snow swallowed every trace. A year later, one lonely probe surfaced, and what it revealed forced investigators to reconsider everything. In the frozen stillness of Big Bear Mountain, where winter landscapes stretch into endless white corridors, Snowpack Ranger Anthony Jeremy carried a duty heavier than most would ever understand. His job wasn't simply to measure snow levels. It was to protect the delicate balance of nature, forecast avalanche risks, and ensure that thousands of lives remained safe throughout the season. On a quiet morning in 2014, Anthony set out to gather routine snowpack data along a familiar route. It was a path he had walked dozens of times before, but that day he never came home. What followed was one of the most agonizing searches in the region's history. Teams combed every ridge, every crevasse, every drainage channel they could access, yet not a single trace of Anthony or his equipment was ever found. For a year, his disappearance sat like a silent wound on the community, until a lone snow probe unexpectedly surfaced down a remote valley, reigniting the case and forcing investigators to re-examine everything they thought they knew. Before we dive into this mysterious and heartbreaking story, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue bringing you deeply investigated true crime and mystery documentaries every week. Anthony Jeremy was not the type of ranger you forgot. At 34 years old, he had already earned the reputation of being one of Big Bear's most dependable snowpack analysts, meticulous, disciplined, and almost obsessively committed to the science behind snow behavior. Friends often joked that he knew more about snow crystals than he did about people, but those close to him understood. Anthony loved his work. Raised in Idaho, he grew up around winter storms, frozen lakes, and mountains that carved their presence deep into the horizon. His fascination with snow began as a teenager when he watched a small avalanche trigger near his family's cabin. No one was hurt, but the event left him with an intense respect for how fast nature could shift from peaceful to deadly. By the time he moved to California and joined the Big Bear Snowpack Division, he had completed certifications in avalanche science, cold weather survival, and terrain mapping. His colleagues described him as the ranger who stayed late analyzing temperature fluctuations or recalibrating equipment that others considered good enough. If Anthony was going into the field, he was prepared. But dedication came with sacrifice. Anthony lived alone in a small cabin near the base of the mountain. He kept few close relationships, aside from a handful of co-workers and an older sister living in Oregon. His life revolved around the mountain, the early data checks, the constant weather shifts, and the long solitary treks into the snowfields. So when Anthony didn't return on March 6, 2014, his co-workers immediately knew something was wrong. This wasn't the type of ranger who ignored radio calls or lost track of time. His absence signaled one terrifying possibility. Something catastrophic had occurred on Big Bear Mountain, and Anthony Jeremy was in trouble. On March 6th, Anthony left the ranger station at sunrise. His assignment was simple: collect snowpack depth measurements, check stability layers, and replace old markers along the mid-elevation ridge known as Winterline Route C. It was a job so routine that his supervisor, Ranger Ellis, expected him back by mid-afternoon. Anthony signed out a standard equipment set: his snow probe, a collapsible shovel, GPS device, avalanche beacon, weather tracker, survival pack. Everything about the assignment followed protocol. Weather conditions were stable: light snowfall, low winds, and consistent temperatures. Nothing indicated that the day would be dangerous. At 10:38 a.m., Anthony radioed in from Checkpoint 3, confirming his data readings. His voice was calm, professional, nothing out of the ordinary. It was the last time anyone heard from him. By 3 p.m., when he still hadn't returned, Ranger Ellis tried calling again, but the radio produced only static. At first, the team assumed he was delayed by unexpected terrain shifts or deeper snow. But an hour later, with no contact and no sign of movement on his GPS tracker, protocol required a welfare search. When the first team reached checkpoint 3, they found Anthony's fresh snowshoe tracks ending abruptly near a cluster of pines. Beyond that point, nothing. No sign of struggle, no broken branches, no misplaced equipment, just an inexplicable absence of tracks leading forward or back. It was as if Anthony had simply vanished into the snow. Within hours, a full-scale search operation was deployed. Search and rescue volunteers, canine units, helicopters, and avalanche experts combed the mountain through the night, pushing through brutal temperatures and unpredictable terrain. But the mountain remained silent. Despite days of effort, not a single clue surfaced. Anthony's disappearance officially became one of Big Bear's darkest mysteries. The search for Anthony stretched on for 12 exhausting days. For the first time in years, the local community witnessed the full force of Big Bear's emergency response system. Volunteers, some who had never met Anthony, showed up with snowshoes, thermal gear, and an unwavering desire to bring the ranger home. They swept valleys, ridgelines, frozen drainage channels, and even searched below cornices where avalanches frequently buried debris. But despite the coordinated effort, every sector of the mountain yielded the same frustrating result: nothing. Search dogs picked up faint scents early on, but the trails quickly vanished, absorbed by shifting winds and fresh snowfall. Helicopters scanned deep crevasses with thermal cameras that detected nothing but the cold pulse of winter. Some team members suspected Anthony had fallen into an unseen snow well or sinkhole, pockets hidden beneath deceptively smooth snow surfaces. Others believed he may have been caught in a small, localized avalanche that buried him instantly. But these theories offered no comfort, especially since no avalanche debris matching those patterns had been identified in the search zones. By day 12, the emotional toll was becoming unbearable. Ranger Ellis, who had worked beside Anthony for nearly a decade, refused to leave the mountain. He became convinced that Anthony had been forced off-route by something no one had considered, a hidden terrain feature or a sudden collapse. But without evidence, even Ellis struggled to justify ongoing operations. Eventually, the search was scaled back, leaving only periodic sweeps as weather allowed. For the community, the loss was personal. Anthony wasn't just a ranger. He was a guardian of the mountain, the man who assessed avalanche dangers, ensured winter safety, and taught school groups about the importance of snow science. His absence left behind a painful silence. And for an entire year, that silence remained unbroken. On the evening of March 11, 2015, a snowboarder named Dylan Crow made a startling discovery. He was cutting across an off-route valley known for its steep drops when something metallic caught the final rays of sunset. Buried halfway in the snow lay a long, slender object, one unmistakable to anyone familiar with avalanche work. It was a snow probe. When he brushed off the snow, he saw the initials A.J. faintly etched along the handle, standard practice for rangers who personalize their gear. Dylan immediately notified authorities. Within hours, investigators arrived at the site, stunned by how far the probe was from Anthony's last known location. The valley was nearly 2 miles away from Checkpoint 3, and separated by heavily forested terrain and steep grade shifts. What raised even more questions was the condition of the probe. There were no visible fractures, no signs of impact, and no damage consistent with being violently transported by an avalanche. Instead, it appeared deliberately placed or dropped with intention. The location itself was bizarre. The valley was rarely traveled, lacking established trails. More importantly, its drainage patterns were unusual. Snow from higher elevations often funneled into narrow channels that stayed hidden unless one understood the terrain intimately. Investigators began to suspect that Anthony had somehow been pulled off his routine route and into one of these hidden channels, places no ranger would intentionally enter without cause. The discovery of the probe reopened the case instantly. Terrain specialists, avalanche scientists, hydrologists, and forensic experts were brought in to reanalyze the mountain with fresh eyes. For the first time in a year, the mountain finally had something to say. To understand Anthony's disappearance, investigators needed to reconstruct not only the terrain, but also the weather conditions on the exact day he vanished. Archived satellite data, temperature logs, snow layer readings, and wind maps were pulled from regional databases. A clearer picture emerged. On March 6, 2014, a subtle temperature inversion occurred across Big Bear Mountain. This inversion created fragile upper snow layers supported by weaker depth hoar, a type of sugar-like snow crystal notorious for collapsing without warning. Under normal circumstances, these layers were manageable. But when paired with hidden drainage channels beneath the surface, they created what avalanche scientists feared most: cold trap collapse zones. These zones could open beneath a person's weight, swallowing them in seconds. Because the snow closed behind them, no trace remained above the surface. No tracks, no disruption, nothing for search teams to identify. Investigators then reconstructed the precise route Anthony likely took between checkpoints. Using his recorded speed and known habits, they predicted he veered slightly east while analyzing wind crust patterns. That small shift placed him near the head of a narrow drainage channel, one nearly invisible from the surface. A collapse could have occurred without warning. The force would have dropped him 10 to 20 feet into a hollow pocket. From there, terrain specialists determined he may have slid or been funneled through the channel into a lower cavity. His snow probe, worn on his pack, could have detached during this descent and surfaced a year later as melting and shifting snow layers transported it downslope. While chilling, the theory was scientifically sound. But one more detail stood out: Anthony's avalanche beacon had never transmitted distress signals. Investigators concluded it may have been damaged during the collapse or shielded by the depth of the cavity. Snowpack can behave like concrete, blocking radio frequencies when compacted. With the science established, investigators were prepared to make a final conclusion. But before releasing the results, they wanted to explore one last possibility: whether fatigue, equipment malfunction, or human error played any role in his vanishing. Their findings would solidify the heartbreaking truth. Using Anthony's last recorded radio transmission, investigators retraced the timeline leading up to his disappearance. At 10:38 a.m., he reported stable snow layers. His tone suggested no stress. Weather logs confirmed the area remained calm for another 2 hours. But gust patterns collected from remote sensors indicated that around 12:17 p.m., a sudden microburst of wind tore through the ridge. Such bursts were known to create momentary visibility drops, even whiteout pockets. If Anthony encountered one while moving between checkpoints, he may have slowed his pace, stopped to reassess, or shifted his route unintentionally. His GPS device, later found to be unreliable in certain low signal zones, offered no assistance. From terrain mapping simulations, investigators believed Anthony unknowingly positioned himself directly above a cold trap zone, one triggered by a subtle pressure change or the shifting snow beneath him. Once the collapse occurred, he would have fallen fast. The descent into the channel likely left him disoriented. Injuries may have prevented him from climbing out. Snow movement could have funneled him deeper. Investigators agreed on one critical detail: Anthony did not suffer. The collapse and subsequent channel slide would have rendered him unconscious almost instantly. Over the next months, snowfall and thaw cycles sealed the channel completely, burying any trace of the ranger beneath layers of compacted snow. Searching above ground, teams had unknowingly walked past the very place he was trapped, unaware that the mountain had hidden him with ruthless efficiency. The snow probe surfacing a year later was not a sign of foul play. It was simply the mountain giving up the one piece it could no longer hold. Anthony's final hours were tragic, but they were rooted in the unpredictable science of winter terrain. He didn't make a mistake. He wasn't careless. He was simply in the wrong place at a moment when nature shifted beneath him. After investigators concluded their findings, Big Bear Mountain's Snowpack Division created a memorial route in Anthony's honor. They named it Jeremy's Line, a trail dedicated to educating new rangers about hidden terrain hazards, cold trap collapses, and the unpredictable dangers of snowpack investigation. Anthony's sister attended the small ceremony. Though grief weighed heavily on her, she expressed gratitude that her brother's story would help others. In her speech, she shared a memory of Anthony as a young boy, kneeling in the snow, marveling at how no two snowflakes were alike. That sense of wonder, she said, never left him. The community carried that sentiment forward. Schools used his story to teach students about mountain safety. Ranger trainees studied the terrain collapse model named after him. Even tourists learned to respect the winter landscape through signs posted along Jeremy's line. Though his disappearance remained heartbreaking, it sparked advancements in safety protocols. New beacon systems were introduced, designed to penetrate deeper snow densities. GPS devices were upgraded. Snowpack mapping became more precise, incorporating satellite layers and improved hazard simulations. Anthony's story also changed how investigators approached cold case disappearances in winter environments. His case served as a scientific reference for understanding how snow movement can conceal evidence, even from experts. In a quiet corner of the ranger station, his original workstation remained intact. His maps, notes, and weather logs were preserved as part of a permanent display. Rangers often paused there before heading into the field, a ritual of respect for the man who gave everything to understand the mountain he loved. Anthony Jeremy may have vanished, but he left behind a legacy rooted in dedication, science, and the eternal bond between humanity and nature's most unforgiving season. Anthony Jeremy's story is one that lingers long after the snow melts. It reminds us that even experts, those who dedicate their lives to reading the mountain's language, can be overtaken by nature's silent traps. His disappearance in 2014 left a community in mourning, yet his recovered snow probe in 2015 unlocked the truth that had been buried beneath layers of winter. What investigators ultimately discovered wasn't negligence or foul play, but a sobering reality. Sometimes the mountain moves in ways no human can predict. Today, Anthony's legacy continues through safer protocols, better equipment, and the countless rangers guided by the innovations born from his case. Though the mountain claimed him, it also preserved the lessons he left behind. If this story moved you, helped you understand the science, or gave you a new perspective on winter mysteries, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support ensures that we can keep bringing you powerful true crime investigations and untold stories from across the United States. Thank you for watching, and remember, nature doesn't always reveal the truth easily, but together we search until the silence finally speaks.